Chapter 7:14. Polio was young, and he had been tossed and turned for an entire night. His mood had changed drastically, so he unconsciously lay on the floor and fell asleep halfway through the charge. Even though he was fast asleep, he still half-hugged the cold and hard mechanical arm to his chest, using his body temperature to warm it up. This position was not too comfortable, so the little fellow's brows were constantly furrowed. Occasionally, he would even move his body. Luo Nan was not sleepy at all. He sat cross-legged in the darkness, watching the little boy beside him. His mind was still filled with the emotional stirrings that arose from this. There were also chaotic and distracting thoughts from his rhythm and plans that had been completely disrupted. The underground karst cave was quite stuffy, especially after the blackout. The equipment had stopped working, and ventilation was a problem. Luo Nan felt very uncomfortable. Luo Nan grabbed the thick and heavy cloak to give himself a gust of wind. His fingers made contact with his chest as he rose and fell. The sensation was soft with a hint of hardness. His chest swelled up slightly, forming a clear contrast with the surrounding muscles. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. He immediately recalled that this was the biochemical reactor. The biochemical reactor had been remolded. After his somatic cells were initialized by the arrangement of tinder within the furnace, they were transformed into fully functional stem cells that proliferated and split. In a certain sense, it was already a part of his body. It was his external organ. There would be no difference even if he took it and sliced it. In comparison, the other artificial muscles that were produced by the biochemical reactor were constructed together with the exoskeleton armor. Their structure was based on Luo Nan's stem cells, and they were modulated according to the formula. The structural strength was similar, but it was more suitable for electromagnetic configurations. Reality proved that Luo Nan's physical strength was a bit lacking. At that time, he had used 2 portions of the substrate to create an electromagnetic muscle membrane structure that was far larger than the furnace body. However, when it came to actual combat experiments, he had only created a paradigm before everything was blown to smithereens. Only the biochemical reactor remained. It enjoyed the same safety mechanism as Luo Nan's main body. The biochemical reactor's various functional areas had already been restored, and its volume had increased by a bit. It was embedded in the juncture between his chest and abdomen, like a demonic insect that had pierced into his flesh and bones. Luo Nan used his fingertips to poke and prod at the biochemical reactor. These were all subconscious movements, and he used this opportunity to organize his thoughts. After a moment, he finally had a clear plan, and the inside of the biochemical reactor correspondingly changed. That fellow with the vicious nickname was sharpening his blade, preparing to turn him into reserve rations. Brain demon. Who's that? Luo Nan had a good habit of asking his secretary if there was something he couldn't decide on. He once again opened up the closed system network. Now that he had to hide from Sister Yuan, the only person he could consult was Cat Eyes. What brain demon? Cat Eyes answered a few calls before arriving at Gear on the north bank of Acumen College in the middle of the night. She was yawning, wanting to take a nap. She was conserving her energy in preparation to cover for that extremely unreliable boss tomorrow morning. Her favorite place to sleep was naturally the bar counter with alcohol. Therefore, she went to the public activity room on the 2nd floor of the basement. Because she was sleepy and drunk, her brain was a bit sluggish when she heard this unfamiliar name. She paused for a moment before remembering, brain demon. That moronic fugitive who believes in eating his own brain. That's a bit too much information. One moment you don't have money, and the next moment you're a wanted criminal. That's a lot of information, okay? Don't tell me you didn't pass the credit rating. Have you already fallen to the point of capturing wanted criminals to earn money? Cough, how is that possible? Actually, it's like this. Luo Nan had a general understanding of the sequence of events from Polio's narration. Actually, even if he didn't go through polio, just the intelligence gathering of the mental sensor network was enough to string together a basic chain of events. The framework of the events was very simple. Polio's mother, Boss June, was an important character in a vagrant power. Zhang Lu and Xanz and the others were members of this power. Zhang Lu Han's wife was Aunt Fun, and she was Boss June's confidant. But due to some reason or conflict of interest, Zhang Lu Han and the others became traitors. They took advantage of Boss June's absence to deal with the problem to raise the flag. Oh no, it was a covert rebellion. Zhang Lu Han and the others were in a dilemma due to more complicated reasons. They clearly did something, but they didn't dare to go too far. They just wanted to capture Polio and use him as a bargaining chip. This gave Polio the chance to escape, and he met Luonan on the way. Luonan felt that he had spoken very clearly, but Cat Eyes didn't gain anything other than another round of yawns. Forget it. I shouldn't have had any confidence in your ability to express yourself. No wonder President Ouyang said that if it weren't for your quick sketching skills, the brains of the pitiful people who listened to your lessons would have exploded. I didn't say it clearly. You should be involved in the conflict between the powers of the vagrants of the wilderness. You have to know that the tribes and gangs of the wilderness are as numerous as the hairs on an ox. Chapter 7:15. In Xia City, it was around 4 o'clock in the morning. Some early morning trainers were already on the streets. But at the same time, it was also the time when people were the most tired. For example, Cat Eyes had soaked in alcohol and a pile of vexing matters for most of the night. She also had to deal with Vice President He, who was famous for being shrewd and capable. She felt extremely tired. When a person was tired, they lost their patience, so she didn't want to guess the deeper meaning of He Yuan's words. She only curled her lips and knocked on the table. Get to the point. He Yuan did not mind her attitude. She was no longer as serious as before. She walked to the front of the bar and sat down on the high stool next to Cat Eyes. She casually picked up a cup and played with it. How can there be an important point in the world? Actually, I came here on a whim to find someone to chat with. Cat Eyes raised her eyebrows. Oh my. The problem becomes serious the moment the leader starts chatting. He Yuan laughed again. Cat Eyes, you've been in good shape lately, which eye of yours sees that I'm not bad? You can call it a judgment. At most, in another month or two, we can see the architect. Cat Eyes blinked her eyes. I'm not the one who wants to ascend. Yes, the growth of supernatural powers is often like natural development. It's just that it doesn't grow from a baby to an adult. Rather, it struggles out of its mother's womb and opens its eyes to see the world. Hee, I know you're talking about someone. Do you want a drink? Seeing He Yuan nod her head, Cat Eyes snapped her fingers. The robot bartender behind the counter woke up from its standby state and concocted cocktails for the two. Amidst the soft sounds of the cup, liquor, soda, and ice cubes colliding, He Yuan's voice also carried a bit of an indistinct meaning. When extraordinary power substantially rises a level, it's almost equivalent to a rebirth. Just like a newborn baby, what he sees and feels is completely different from when he was in his mother's womb. So it's normal to test and adapt. That's right, we need to verify the results. But you must also take note that the baby is only stretching out his soft fingers, while we might be stretching out our deadly blades, and Mr. Luo. The finished cocktail was placed in front of He Yuan. The light blue wine swirled in the saucer-shaped champagne glass, like the transparent seawater near the shore. However, as soon as his fingers exerted force, the wine in the cup turned into a whirlpool, violently rubbing against the walls of the cup. What Mr. Luo found out is a storm that can stir up the world. Cat Eyes let out a whistle. So what if he did? Just because he can control the storm, we have to tie up all his fingers or just chop them off? He Yuan gave a rare shrug. I just believe that there are shortcuts to experience and learning. Words. Some things might as well be said directly. Anyway, I don't really like this boss. If your conditions are right, maybe I'll agree on the spot. Sorry, I don't know. Heir took a sip of the light blue wine and immediately let the rim of the cup stop at her lips. She subconsciously bit down on it. This was a very uncharacteristic action of Secretary He, but Cat Eyes found it a bit more pleasing to the eye. There is only a fine line between wanting others to do something and forcing others to do something. I don't think I can grasp the scale of this, so I hope to find more people to help me think about it. And then you found me. Cat Eyes tilted her head to look at her. Heir smiled and raised her cup to show her respect. Well, it's my pleasure. Cat Eyes also picked up her own cup. As an unfortunate person who has already been swept away by the storm, do you want to hear the truth from me? Please speak. Cat Eyes drained the cup of strong wine in one gulp. She borrowed the hot and spicy energy that rushed down her throat and into her brain to laugh heartily. Those unfortunate people who are about to be swept away by the storm, welcome. To be swept away by a fellow like Luo Nan serves you right for being unlucky. Don't forget to thank me. In the end, the laughter from 2,000 kilometers away could not reach Spring City. It was impossible for the living beings here to receive the messages filled with schadenfreude. This was especially true within Zhang Lu Han's store in the U-Hole market. The sounds of discussion in the great hall outside were clamorous. It was necessary to close the door in order to keep the inner room quiet. An unplanned flaw had appeared in the operation. Everyone felt uneasy in their hearts. Compared to the people outside, the people in the bedroom unconsciously stood in a more central position. They played a more important role. Within the entire store, the only person who had lost her freedom was Lady Yanfun. Right now she was lying on a bed. Her entire body was stiff, and her breathing was weak. She wore only a thin layer of clothing on her body. Many parts of the clothing were dark red and glued together. She looked weak and miserable. In front of the bed, Wright slowly and methodically put on a pair of sterile gloves. I don't like bugs. Their way of thinking is completely different from ours. However, the mutant types of insects are the most abundant in the wilderness. Many functions can be found from their bodies. For example, the one that will appear next. I call it the treasure bug. It can secrete many kinds of pheromones. It doesn't matter what effect these pheromones have within its race. We only need to be concerned about what kind of effect it will have on the state of the human body and mind. Wright put on the gloves and his 10 fingers flexed a few times. He was like a strict doctor. Next, he extended his hand and very gently supported Yanfun's cheeks, helping her straighten out her position. The restless and almost explosive feeling of humiliation agitated her body and mind, and it also caused the sensitive area of her chest to produce an uncontrollable physiological reaction. Very good, Ms. Yanfun, you are also secreting sex pheromones. You don't need to pay attention to what this means for the treasure bug. You only need to understand that it is also very sensitive to this kind of information and has a series of corresponding behaviors. Here it comes. Wright withdrew his right hand and quickly spread it out like a magic trick. He gradually lowered it to ensure that Yanfun could see the bug that had just crawled out of his cuff. The treasure bug in his mouth was flat, like a fat leaf, and was even better than a live bug. Its entire body was iron gray, and it covered almost half of Wright's palm. This guy is a bit big, especially after it drilled into the subcutaneous tissue. The problem is a bit more serious. But I can guarantee that when the time comes, you will definitely forget about this little thing. The pleasure and pain you will feel will be far more than what it will bring you. Yanfun lay on her back on the bed, her fully exposed chest uncontrollably rising and falling, and her fit and beautiful curves were even more thoroughly revealed. This caused Wright to temporarily jump out of the role of interrogator. he turned his head and praised Zhang Luan. "You have a good eye." Zhang Luan's entire face twitched. He lowered his head and smoked, not saying a word. Compared to the current humiliation, he was more worried about the treatment and corresponding respect that the new power would give him. However, at least from Right's side, he couldn't see anything. On the contrary, because of this interrogation, Xinz and the others downstairs would probably be at odds with him. Why was it completely different from what he had expected? On the bed, Yan Fan's body suddenly trembled greatly. This was already the limit of her current physical state. The treasure bug was penetrating the skin of her chest and slowly seeping down, causing a continuous painful stimulation. Right had described the pain as insignificant, but this was clearly not the case. Even though Yan Fan's nervous system was already numb and she could barely speak a complete sentence, she still couldn't help but moan and vaguely curse at this moment. Right smiled as he looked at all this and explained, "The treasure bug will penetrate your subcutaneous tissue and slowly move to the spine, where it will deeply fuse with your nervous system and become a special gland. Of course, I can do this from the beginning, but this process isn't meaningless. On the one hand, the treasure bug can collect and adapt to the various hormones secreted by your body during this process. On the other hand, it can also make it easier for you to enter an extreme state." Very good, you're on the right path. Chapter 7:16. Right didn't react to the sudden knock on the door, but Zhang Luan was startled. He raised his voice, "Who is it?" "Brother," and the voice outside was Zhang Luan's number one subordinate, Xinz. At this time, Yan Fan on the bed seemed to be moaning and cursing a notch higher. Zhang Luan's face was inexplicably hot, and he shouted back in a rough voice, "What are you shouting for? Don't you see I'm interrogating you?" He emphasized the word "I," but his raised voice caused Right to glance at him with dissatisfaction. "Maybe I shouldn't let non-professionals in." The corner of Zhang Luan's eyes twitched again. After Right finished speaking, he only showed him the back of his head. Zhang Luan threw away the cigarette butt, adjusted his breathing, and walked over to open the door. During the process, he subconsciously tilted his head. Because his body had shifted, there was no longer light to block him. He saw his wife wriggling on the bed, and the extent of her muscles twitching was far greater than this, so much so that the open wounds left by the torture earlier burst open one after another, once again oozing blood. Zhang Luan hurriedly turned his head again, and heard Right continue to speak to Yan Fan. It sounded gentle, but it was chilling. "Very good, this level is just right. My professional tells me that the activity in your cerebral cortex is very intense, and they are emitting tens of times more information than normal. I believe that the secret door in your heart is now open to me." His footsteps quickened, and Zhang Luan finally touched the doorknob. He pulled the door open with a lot of strength, but it only opened a big gap. At the same time, he used his strong body to block the gap. He stared at Xinz, and said in a strict tone, "What's going on?" Xinz's expression was also quite serious. "Brethren, I just looked at the electricity meter monitor. The blackout area is obviously still running electricity. Should we take another look? Are you sure it's in Wu Jun's shop? How's the electricity consumption?" "It's not that big." Zhang Luan was indeed listening to Xinz, but his current brain circuit was obviously not suitable for in-depth analysis. Right's slow voice in the room was like a knife repeatedly grinding on his ear mold. "I don't mind telling you another little piece of information. In your current state, the taste of brain juice is not good. There's too much seasoning in it, so I'll give you a chance to digest it. What you need to do is to strive for a small chance of survival during this period of time. You should do your best to obey me, please me, and tell me everything you know. Of course, you should also trust me, and believe that this little fellow is a very sensitive control center, and can almost perfectly repeat all of my commands." "Why did you say almost?" This was because the orders given to it would occasionally conflict with its instincts. He was still leaning against the door, his gaze returning to the direction of the couch. Yen Fun, who was suffering from the piercing torment of the treasure bug, clenched her teeth again. At the same time, she tried hard to turn her head, hoping to see the person who had brought such a huge change at the door. Even if she couldn't do it, she had to use some method to remind the other of the great danger hiding in a certain corner of the room. However, her throat was tightly clasped by Right. The back and forth friction between her laryngeal bone and laryngeal canal blocked her breathing passages and blood vessels, making her consciousness even more fuzzy. In a daze, she heard Right's low, hoarse laughter. "Card payment. Looks like you have an impatient temper. How much is that car?" There was no response from inside the room. Right was displeased. "I'm asking you, Zhang Luhan. How much is that off-road vehicle?" Zhang Luhan had already been reduced to a mouse in the bellows. He was completely unable to keep up with the tempo of these two people. He could only rely on his instincts to speak. I think it's 3,000 transaction points." Aha. Pineapple said to give me a 10% discount to express his gratitude. Right sighed in admiration. What a forthright child. Then it's 300 points. Just give it to him. But... How could Zhang Lu and be willing to step forward and throw his life away? He still wanted to resist, but Right tilted his body to the side. His ice-cold and emotionless gray-blue eyes cut over, letting Zhang Lu understand that if he dared to say the word no, the next one to lie down as a corpse would be him. Zhang Lu moved out step by step. His speed was touching. Right didn't pay any more attention to him. He turned around to face Luonan. "We can properly discuss the problem of the control center. You mentioned the Vulcan ant just now. It really was a very professional suggestion. Frankly speaking, the laboratory here has indeed done a few experiments. However, this sort of social species suffers too many interference and influences from the social model. The ant queen is also a huge problem." Luonan tossed the swipe card terminal and responded lazily, "Worker ants and soldier ants are indeed like this. Then we'll just directly control the ant queen. I've heard that Brain Demon Right is a top-notch master hypnotist. I look forward to your performance. However, I hope that there are more solid steps." Right was somewhat disappointed. No matter how beautiful the proposal was, it could only be described as bragging if there was no substantive entry point. In that case, there was nothing to talk about. His eyes slanted to the other side. It was said that a certain person looked tall and strong, but when he walked, he couldn't even be compared to an old lady with bound feet. Was it going to take until tomorrow to finish? Being penetrated by Right's ice-cold gaze a second time, Zhang Liuan truly felt as if there was a blade on his back. His feet instinctively sped up, and then he arrived. Zhang Luhan's nostrils started to ache again when he reached the very close standard again. In fact, half of his face was still smeared with blood. He didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that he must be in a very sorry state. He didn't have any idea what was going on. He floated around, his voice trembling slightly, "Furnace Elder. Sir. Can I operate the card terminal?" "Of course." Luonan extended his hand and handed the terminal over. He waited for Zhang Lu to take it, then he suddenly laughed. "Polio is so straightforward. You're his temporary guardian, so you shouldn't fall behind. How about you give me a discount as well?" Okay. Actually, the transaction points I obtained from my credit rating are only 328 points. It's quite painful to have them deducted all at once. It wouldn't be a problem if it was just a fraction. How about 28? I'll continue with the discount. Zhang Lu revealed an awkward and helpless smile. He was completely confused by Luo Nan's words. Next, he could only stare blankly at Luo Nan as he took out the metal card representing the transaction voucher and lightly pasted it onto the card terminal. So it's like this. That's right. Wait a moment. Zhang Lu then finally remembered the basic operation, but at this stage, he only had this bit of instinct left. He completely followed Luo Nan's instructions and entered the insincere number 28. A beep rang out, and the card terminal was successfully swiped. Zhang Lu and subconsciously glanced at the display screen. The basic information related to the furnace was displayed on it. It was also the basic proof for completing transactions and employment in the various vagrant exchanges such as the U-Hole market, fleshly side, mechanical design, and assembly. Zhang Lu and didn't know why he blurted out these words. Behind him, Wright let out a laugh. What a dog's hit system. I heard that it was invented by the leader of your Ciel Luo order. Oh my, he's also a dog's hit character. Wright's reaction was quite big, and Zhang Lu's face twitched. He suddenly understood why Wright insisted on letting him swipe the card. Wright was clearly collecting information on the furnace to make a judgment. The problem was that from Wright's perspective, the answer he obtained was just like the money being swiped in. There was no sincerity to speak of. There's no fleshly side that can knock down 10 people in an instant, and at the same time, be able to completely block out the changes in the surrounding atmosphere. So, dogs hit fleshly side. This Mr. Furnace is only a mental side. Nonsense, I can guess it too. Zhang Lu and silently cursed, and Luo Nan's line of sight followed Wright's explanation at this time. He turned to look at Zhang Lu's side. Zhang Lu and instinctively revealed the hearty smile he normally wore when socializing. But his current state of mind could only seriously deform his facial expression. Even he himself felt embarrassed. Zhang Lu and Wright's deep and low voice suddenly came from behind him. Zhang Lu and subconsciously quivered. He wanted to turn his head, but his mind suddenly went blank. Wright's words from just now reappeared in his mind, bullshit fleshly side. It can only be the mental side. Hold on, the mental side. This fellow is a mental side. Then his close combat ability should be quite weak. Also, I'm a genuine fleshly side, and my combat ability is top-notch. Now that the distance is within reach, isn't this a great opportunity? And at this time, he saw the gaze of the furnace shift in Wright's direction. Just as it was about to turn, this was the best opportunity. A sure hit strike. The high-speed flow of thoughts instantly pieced together into a seemingly reliable chain. It was like some sort of transmission device that spurred Zhang Lu's body, including the courage and gamble that were suppressed in the deepest depths of his heart. Zhang Lu's mind heated up. He stamped his feet, lifted his hips, twisted his waist, and threw a punch. He borrowed the good position of standing sideways next to the furnace to unleash a left swing fist, biting towards his target's waist and kidneys like a poisonous dragon. With the current distance between the two, Zhang Lu's fist had just exerted force when the tip of his fist had already reached the edge of the cloak. Then the fist drilled inexorably inside. It hit Zhang Lu and could already feel the side muscles of his opponent's waist from the feedback of his fist. He seized the opportunity to twist his fist. He wanted to use all of his strength to smash his opponent's internal organs into mush. But in that moment, his twisting fist only tossed and turned in the empty air behind the cloak. At the same time, a figure flashed before his eyes. Just by relying on the instincts of a fighter, Luo Nan was able to determine that his opponent's feet should be a cross step. Luo Nan went against the direction of his fist and made a graceful dodge. An expert. This thought jumped out in Zhang Lu's mind, but he was unable to correct his instinctive driving force. He could only follow the predetermined path of judgment. I can't let the distance between me and the spirit. This thought was so strong that Zhang Lu's mind exploded with a bang. He completely lost his follow-up plan. Instead, with an absolutely unorthodox movement, his body lunged forward. His other arm also stretched out and forcefully wrapped around the furnace's waist and abdomen. Even if he couldn't hug it, he had to grab the furnace's cloak. He had to restrict this person's movements. As for what to do after that, it was completely out of Zhang Lu An's consideration. Perhaps Zhang Lu An's unorthodox movement had some unexpected results. In the next instant, he really did manage to grab the middle of the cloak. Both of their figures froze. Next. What should I do next? Zhang Lu An was suddenly stunned. He completely didn't understand how the situation had turned out this way. It was also at this moment that Wright, who had been speaking in a low and drawn-out tone, suddenly let out a sharp whistle. At the side of the room, a layer of blurry stone powder and water mist suddenly splashed out from the stone wall structure that was originally part of the natural karst cave, blurring people's vision. A ferocious flat head the size of half a human passed through the side of the stone wall. Wrapped in a misty water mist, it opened its bloody mouth that was similar to a crocodile's, biting towards the direction where Lei Lin and the furnace were entangled. Giant salamander, the pet of the brain demon. Zhang Lu An still remembered that it was this monster that had seriously injured and subdued the skilled Yan Fen in the blink of an eye when he had jumped back. Its strength was extremely strong. And now this cooperation was also seamless. Wait, I'm also in the attack range. Zhang Lu An suddenly sobered up. His mind was even more agile than usual. In an instant, he understood the role he had played in this series of actions. Even the reason why he was so fearless was also clear and obvious. He screamed, "Right, you!" What followed was an even sharper hissing sound. Zhang Lu An felt his body float up, and then he was thrown out by a terrifying force. And the place where the force was applied was its extended right arm. Chapter 7:18. Zhang Lu An screamed loudly. His blood flow had sped up due to him gathering his energy and exerting his strength. A large open wound suddenly appeared, and his situation turned for the worse. Blood sprayed out from the ruptured part of his flesh and blood. The enormous pain and fear that followed directly smashed his mental defenses. His entire face contorted to the limit, and he even began to tear up. Oh! What terrible execution! As Wright lamented, the giant salamander that had mistakenly struck him wasn't greedy. Its thick and fat body came over horizontally, occupying nearly half the space between the bed and the door. It also blocked between Wright and Luo Nan, becoming a solid barrier. Luo Nan avoided the fatal attack in the nick of time and shook his head under his cloak. Then he looked at the rock wall that the giant salamander had drilled out from. The wall had undergone some renovations, so it could be considered smooth and flat. There weren't any holes that could allow a monster of that size to pass through. There were only a few traces of wetness. It was similar to the wall-passing technique. It was a bidirectional distortion of the giant and the semi-void. No, there should be another ability. It looks like you really are a fleshly body. The level of your ability is quite surprising. Wright was still speaking in a slow and unhurried manner like a boss, but the strength he used to grip Yan Fen's throat had clearly increased. Luo Nan sighed. You've said so much nonsense. This giant salamander of yours is about to breathe its last. I learned in biology class that the tetrodotoxin contained in the salamander is insoluble in water. If you want to spray a poisonous mist, you probably have to use its acidic bodily fluids to neutralize it. It's hard enough to do this over and over again. Biology class. One is never too old to learn. Wright's gaze roamed over Luo Nan's cloak. He didn't linger on this topic, but who knew what he was thinking? 2 seconds later, Wright returned to communication mode. It was as if hypnotizing Zhang Lu and to mount a sneak attack and pouring neurotoxin into the room had never happened. This giant salamander doesn't satisfy me. This is why I don't like the karst caves of Spring City. There are far too few mutants here that are suitable to be controlled. At the beginning of the aberration era, this karst cave was one of the first areas to fall into enemy hands. However, because it attracted the most attention, it was cleaned out early on and became the isolation zone between Spring City and the wilderness. Then, it was filled with people like Zhang Luan. Zhang Luan had already fainted due to massive bleeding, pain, and fear, so he couldn't hear this evaluation. Wright only said it casually, and the focus of the topic quickly jumped to Zhang Luan's wife. Moreover, he had successfully attracted Wright's attention. Even if it was only for an instant, it was enough to distract Wright. It was at this moment that the long flat tail of the giant salamander, which had been disliked, suddenly swung rapidly from a position close to the ground. It was like a steel blade scraping across the ground. Wright lost his balance amidst the strange sound of flesh and bone being torn apart. His brain hadn't reacted in time. He had partially overlooked this change, so much so that he still had a smile on his face. Then his entire smiling face became crooked due to the tilt of his body. His instinctive reaction surpassed the speed of his thinking in the next moment. Wright's right hand instinctively exerted force, wanting to snap Yanfan's throat. However, he didn't feel anything at all. He transmitted his thoughts over, but his entire right arm didn't receive the feedback it should have. Wright's eyes weren't enough. His eyes had just dropped to his feet when they slanted to his right arm. Therefore, from the corner of his eye, he glanced at the foot that had been completely dislocated and the ankle that was only left with bone stubble and rotten flesh. The focus of his eyes was an even more bizarre scene. His right arm had been separated from his body from the elbow. There wasn't any blood splashing out, only the instantly decaying flesh and skin structure. It was like mycelium spores that scattered and fluttered in the air. Ah! Amidst his hoarse roar, the right arm that had been separated from his body actually made a slight reaction. It was more like the final spasm of his broken nerves and muscles due to the residual force. It flipped Yanfan's body from a flat position to a sideways position, almost pulling him off the bed. He had enough strength, but he had used it in the wrong direction. Due to the change in his posture, Yanfan's effective field of vision rapidly expanded. He finally saw the intense and bloody scene on the other side of the bed. Very quickly, another ruthless stroke was added to the scene. Wright had lost a leg, and the force exerted on his upper body was also dislocated. Naturally, he lost his balance and fell to the side. He bounced off the edge of the bed and fell to the ground. The giant salamander, which was very close to him, subconsciously swung its tail again. This time, the long, blade-like tail practically cut through the middle of Wright's chest and abdomen. As it cut through his flesh, fat, fascia, and even organs, it also turned his roar into a muffled moan. In the end, Lake didn't say the latter half of his words. He just used his remaining, blood-splattered left hand to forcefully slap the base of the giant salamander's tail. This should be a forceful signal. In the end, a considerable portion of the giant salamander was still under his control. The body of this thick and sturdy monster, which didn't have any vocal organs, trembled, rubbing against the ground as it charged forward. However, a major problem appeared in its coordination. Its originally vigorous pounce became completely inaccurate. It swayed left and right, like a car that had lost control. With a crash, it scraped against the door frame and half the wall as it charged into the living room. Then came the noise of an enormous struggle. The safety of the people lying on the ground in disorder outside was worrying. Wright lay on the ground, looking at this scene in astonishment. Soon, his gaze returned to the shadow of Luonan's hood. 2 seconds later, he spoke with a hoarse voice, "How did you do it?" "It's as I said before." Fire God Ant Luonan indicated for Wright to shift his gaze to look at the ant-type mutant that was crawling on the ground amidst the bloodstains. These were 2 large ants the size of a thumb. They had just fallen off the giant salamander's body and were crawling towards the group of their own kind. And the number of fire god ants on the giant salamander's body was over 10 times greater. Fresh delivery. I just got them. Luo Nan swept a glance at Rui Wen, who was in the shadows in the corner. He revealed a smile that Wright couldn't see. You control and induce this salamander's instincts and basic thoughts. The fire god ant controls its central nervous system. You make the salamander view me as an enemy, and I use it to perform a set of simple actions. Back and forth. It's very fair. Wright stared blankly at the fire god ant crawling in his bloodstains. Where's the ant queen? You're talking about controlling the ant queen. No matter what, the ant queen is on the mental side. She's also the axis of collective consciousness. It doesn't matter where she is. You just need to control the signal from a remote relay. Controlling the ant queen. Wright discovered that he didn't understand Luo Nan's explanation, but he could feel that it was a matter of course. Controlling a nest of fire god ants. Then I'll observe and experiment. I'll do a few more rounds. That's all. Luo Nan really was a matter of course. On the plane of reality, controlling a nest of mutants and controlling the corresponding population was still a shocking bomb that could blow up the academic world, the inner world, and even the wider domain. Not to mention anything else, just relying on this topic alone was enough to support a large laboratory and publish hundreds of high-quality theses. Then he could rely on citations and honor points to eat for a lifetime. With this kind of experimental foundation, it wasn't strange for him to do anything. Wright's lips and teeth opened and closed. He was barely able to turn his weak breath into speech. There was also a hoarse and strange laughter. Yes. Yes. You're more professional than me. Chapter 719. Wright's own aura was practically overturned, yet the abyssal region's configuration remained unchanged. Clearly, it wasn't based on Wright's will. It was borrowing some sort of external force. But in order to borrow power, one's body needed to have a basic levering power. Wright, who had entered a dying state, had chosen to burn himself. Under the state of flames, the macromolecules that formed the human body would become especially excited. They would decompose into atoms and then rapidly undergo all sorts of chemical reactions. They would be pieced together into carbon dioxide, water vapor, or something else. At the same time, substances with higher melting points and boiling points would be left behind. Of course, Wright wasn't truly burning right now. Or perhaps it could be said that what was burning was not his body, but his soul. Even the virtual brain system had never made a clear definition of the essence of the soul. But from the perspective of a cultivator, their core, which needed to be stable and firm, suddenly underwent a phase change. What it displayed seemed to be no different from the laws of the material world. The soul burned and released heat. Moreover, it reacted with the other components of the surrounding environment to recombine into a new structure. Once a reaction occurred, the result of the reconstruction would be irreversible. Luo Nan watched as Wright's burning soul fused with certain components of the abyssal region storm. Wright's burning soul fused with a completely different form to fill the precise configuration. The precision of this configuration far exceeded the limits of what a B-mental side could control. But after paying the price of burning his soul, the results were immediate. The power of the torrential storm that was stirred up instantly increased by over 5 times. And as the boundary of the burning continued to penetrate inward, Wright lost even more of the essence of his soul. But the power he could control grew stronger and stronger. This sort of burning certainly followed a special rule framework. Only then could the released energy operate in a more effective manner. It didn't scatter and dissipate without any meaning. It was a bit like an altar. Luo Nan subconsciously compared his own altar framework with it. The more he looked, the more similarities there were. This was indeed a configuration system similar to a sacrificial order. It was just that it was more cruel and violent. And judging from Luo Nan's theory of being a tool type and a plant type, it clearly belonged to the latter. Luo Nan quietly leaned against the wall. His gaze penetrated the barrier of the material world to observe the complex state of the abyssal region. The system of this order is huge. It has a developed root system that covers a wide area through the abyssal region. However, it obviously has a more complicated hierarchy and even authority settings. Right shouldn't belong to the upper echelons of the system because the power he borrows only comes from the tip of the root system. Or perhaps it's just the humus soil that's affected by the roots and fallen leaves. Hey, no matter what, Right was still a B-rank psychic. Regardless of which organization he was in, he should be in the middle or upper echelons. If even he was only in the periphery, then wouldn't the core strength of this order be at the top? Luo Nan's eyes blinked a few times. It was at this moment that Right raised his blood-stained left hand. The color of the blood and the wound on the skin of his palm that had just been torn apart rapidly formed a distorted and deformed figure. The power of qi and blood and the storm of the abyss area converged at the center of the palm. The air pressure in the room was clearly rising rapidly. Due to the uneven distribution between the areas, an invisible whirlpool was formed. Since it was already like this in the real world, the storm in the abyss zone became even more agitated. The mental side, or at least the mental side below the level of an extraordinary, would find it several times more difficult to temporarily construct a structure in such an environment. In other words, Luo Nan had lost the initiative on the level of combat. Right's lips parted to reveal a warped smile. The pain of having his stomach split open made him lose interest in talking. He was already impatient to reap the pleasure of an extreme counterattack. Die! Luo Nan furrowed his brows. He noticed that there was another indescribable act behind Right's bloodshot and turbid eyes. It was slowly opening amidst the torrential storm of the abyss zone. There was a bit of error in his previous judgment. The order system that Right belonged to still possessed a flexible and flexible method of setting up the level of authority. Perhaps Right was only able to use the humus soil in the beginning, but as the level of the sacrifice increased, so much so that the influence of the event itself could still touch the main body of the root system to continue increasing its power. At this very moment, that bewitching eye was releasing light and absorbing light. It stirred the abyss zone and reorganized information within the chaotic storm in order to understand the various changes in the state of affairs of this side of the world. This was also a process of awakening of authority. The greater the matter, the greater the effort. Luo Nan sighed in response to this. Tonight has already been full of accidents. Now that a big guy has jumped in, it's really hard to clean things up. It's best if we don't meet for now. What the hell are you talking about? Right's words were squeezed out from between his teeth. Luo Nan's incomprehensible words and the casual attitude he displayed were far more painful than the lacerations on his hands and feet and the wounds on his chest and abdomen. His current sorry appearance made it impossible for him to assume a calm posture. He could only use even more violent methods to wash away the humiliation of his crushing defeat and heavy injuries. His lips opened and closed as he chanted the incantation of sacrifice. The secret sound resonated with the mental and material planes to hypnotize his own body. He did his best to match the gradually awakening level of power in the abyss zone. Then he used his broken fleshly body as a guide, disregarding the consequences, to form the most lethal attack. Right's voice rose, the eye of all souls that pierces through the heavens. There was a sudden click in the air. It was as if an invisible finger had turned off an invisible air switch. At the same time, the abyss zone's sacrificial configuration was like a slanted fort piled up by children on a beach. It didn't even have to endure the frontal impact of the waves. It collapsed with a rumble because of a small vibration. The abyss zone's slowly opened eye of all souls was like a sand painting. It warped beyond recognition in the blink of an eye. Wright's eyes widened, but soon, the fragile water crystals exploded from the recoil force. The powerful force that the abyss zone had just gathered then collapsed mercilessly devoured him. The humus of the order was originally on the periphery, so it didn't matter if it received the attack. However, Wright, who was close at hand, seemed to have a bomb placed in his skull and his internal organs. Blood sprayed out from his 7 orifices at the same time, especially his eyeballs. His already cracked chest and abdomen sprayed out a mist of blood and pieces of internal organs. They were spun by the vortex of air, covering most of the room. As for Wright himself, he was a bloody mess. It was hard to call him human. It was also at this moment that Yen Fun, who was on the bed, obtained strength from who knows where. She used her hoarse voice to let out a shout filled with delight. Luo Nan shot a glance in that direction. Actually, he himself was within the range of the blood that sprayed out. However, he couldn't care about these details at this time. He slowly walked forward amidst the chaotic vortex of air that had lost its order. He walked to Wright's side, who was already breathing more than he was breathing. Though Wright's sacrificial configuration was destroyed, Luo Nan wasn't happy to see the chaotic storm that surged and devoured him on the level of the abyss zone. People needed to finish what they started. Luo Nan didn't forget that the surroundings of Spring City were filled with the hounds of Quantum Corporation. This group of people were all nervous. If by any chance the other side really did follow the trail, then it would become a seesaw. The work was completed 3 seconds later. The air vortex formed by the imbalance of air pressure within the room was smoothed out. The fluttering cloak calmed down as well. It streaked across Wright's body and face, making his body appear faintly discernible under the lights of the room. Light and shadow instantly intersected, and a visible change occurred to Wright's ruined body. His twisted and shattered body suddenly became orderly. Even though his limbs were still incomplete, his figure could already be clearly discerned. Even the blood, flesh, and internal organ fragments that filled the air were gathered and pieced together by incorporeal hands. They were reassembled. At least on the surface, they were reassembled. This was like a bloody and splendid magic trick. In fact, the mutual interference between the mental and material planes was like a magic designed by the Creator. At the exhibition platform, the giant salamander, who was lying lazily on the ground, suddenly lifted its head and twisted its body. Its bulging eyeballs rotated as it looked in the direction of Polio and Polio. Polio and Polio stared at each other. Polio held his breath and exclaimed, "Wow!" Using the chain configuration to link the individual brainwaves with the sensory organs of a single Vulcan ant. Then, through the condensation ring's global sensor network, it will connect with the Vulcan ant population. Simplified operating instructions and related interfaces have been added in the middle. It can partially realize intelligent operation, allowing idiots to operate. There are no problems with the basic idea, but it takes up a bit more resources and harasses the manipulator behind the scenes. After all, it's not like watching a child. I can optimize it further in the future. Luo Nan's brain operated at high speeds. He went over the design model of the present that Midnight had drafted in his mind once more to make sure that there were no obstructions. And from the feedback from the sensor network, Polio was having a lot of fun. Everyone was to their liking. Everything was perfect. Of course, this was just an embellishment after a series of tense events. It was a way of taking care of the cute little fellow. What Luo Nan truly needed to pay attention to was the entire plot thread he discovered last night. The Order of Justice and the Eye of Secret Contract were listed as one of the 3 great secret orders of the Amaterasu Order. Why would they be interested in the so-called holy relic of the Pheasant Order, something that even their own believers looked down upon? If this piece of information were to be sold, it would be enough for the various intelligence teams to give out month-end incentives. But what Luo Nan paid the most attention to in this entire thread was Luo Nan, Are you seriously listening to Teacher Lee's words? Ha! Luo Nan shuddered. Only now did he come back to his senses. He noticed the people around him and the place they were in. Mrs. Luo Shuqing's gaze was stern. Her expression was furious as she sat on the sofa in the advisor's office. 2 meters away was the master of this office, Acumen College's dedicated advisor for the 10th grade, Mr. Li Mingde. Luo Nan himself stood across from the coffee table with the identity of a student who had committed a crime, receiving an education. However, his mind had been wandering outside the heavens just now. Old immortal Mingde's words didn't even enter his ears. They were blocked out cleanly. It's fine. It's fine. A young man's mind is quick-witted. His imagination is rich. A moment of distraction is nothing. And I understand student Luo Nan's personality. I'm worried that he's overthinking things. Li Mingde gently twirled the grizzled beard beneath his chin. This retro style suited his appearance quite well. It really did give him the air of a sage. If the cold sweat on his forehead was a bit less, then it would be even more perfect. Luo Shuqing bowed once more to express her apology. Teacher Li, Luo Nan has really caused you trouble during this time. Li Mingde chuckled. He was just about to continue the previous topic when Luo Nan's gaze shot over. The back of his neck turned slightly cold and he shook his head vigorously on the spot. No, no, no. This child, Luo Nan, is publicly acknowledged by our Academic Affairs Division. He's smart and precocious. He's quite different from ordinary children. This is a factor of his personality and IQ. It has nothing to do with how he conducts himself. You see, he doesn't have many friends in his age group. But he has a lot in common with his upperclassmen and the elites outside the school. That scoundrel Xie Junping has given him quite a few rotten ideas. Hu Huaying comes over every day to clean up his mess. The second generation of the construction society gnashes their teeth in anger at the mention of him. The Mystic Arts Research Society is directly surrounded by him. He brings bodyguards to the school and he openly flirts with society girls. All of you parents really don't know. Hiss. Li Mingde's hand exerted strength and broke 2 strands of his beard. His lower jaw and heart twitched twice, but in the end, he maintained the demeanor of a teacher. Mrs. Luo, we can't use ordinary eyes to look at special talents. Student Luo Nan has participated in many activities in this school year. He has also obtained outstanding results. Actually, this is something that the school and us teachers are happy to see. Luo Shuqing revealed a courteous and dignified smile to conceal her awkward and complex emotions. Perhaps Li Mingde saw through it, or perhaps he was completely indifferent. He just continued to speak according to the established plan, but in today's era of authority, one accepts the convenience of intelligence and also bears the restrictions of intelligence. In this way, some rules that are very suitable for ordinary people are used to treat geniuses. That's right, it's a student with extraordinary talent like Luo Nan. These rules often appear rigid and unreasonable. The school also hopes to find a plan that satisfies both sides. Student Luo Nan's special talent will be preserved to the greatest degree while finding a suitable and compliant space for him. Therefore, we discussed for a bit. Perhaps Mrs. Luo, as his guardian, can be flexible and jump out of the boundaries of linear thinking. Luo Shuqing took a deep breath. What do you mean? Chapter 722. By the time the aunt and nephew left the office building, the golden-red rays of the late spring setting sun had already traversed more than half of the campus. The rays were cast from the angle between the North Shore jungle and the Long River, casting a thick film of light over the bright green wetland vegetation. Luo Nan slightly narrowed his eyes. His gaze pierced through the layer of sunlight that ordinary people would find hard to look directly at. He swept his gaze over the movement and changes within the campus. He wasn't observing. He just had nothing to do. Mrs. Luo Shuqing didn't say a single word for an entire 3 minutes after leaving Li Mingda's office. She just walked forward in the corridor, in the elevator, and in the vast campus. It was as if she had completely forgotten the existence of her nephew. Okay, she was really angry this time. Luo Nan reckoned that he was probably the only child of the Luo family in 3 generations to have been recommended by the school authorities to take a leave of absence from school. Taking a leave of absence from school was just a polite way of saying it. Retaining the school credits, hours, honor, and so on and so forth didn't change the essence of having to repeat a year. Without a doubt, this was the vile incident of being hung from a beam and ruthlessly whipped. Luo Nan really didn't know what to say. He had the help of Xie Junping and Hu Huaying, 2 super tinkers with connections that reached the heavens, but he still couldn't make up for the lowest standard of absenteeism at Acumen College. He had really been too arrogant these past few months. Perhaps he should start with the SCA and invade the Department of Education system. Luo Nan's mind spun with meaningless thoughts. At the same time, he had no choice but to admit that there was a little bit of relief and delight in the depths of his heart at the very least. If this matter were to really be smashed, then his life would really change. Mrs. Luo Shuqing suddenly stood still in front of him. Luo Nan reacted quickly and stood firm at the same time. His face hung low and his eyebrows lowered, making a terrified and ashamed appearance. Unfortunately, his acting skills were never up to par. Luo Shuqing's heart didn't fluctuate in the slightest. Her tone was flat as well. Do you have a lot of things to deal with over there? Huh? Yeah. Of course Luo Nan knew that the so-called over there referred to the society and even the inner world. Normally at home, this was a topic that everyone was well aware of but tacitly didn't touch upon. Luo Nan really didn't know how to respond when it was suddenly brought up today. Fortunately, Luo Shuqing did not need Luo Nan to make up any more excuses or lies. She had her own observations and judgments. I can guess that you've done quite well over there. Your uncle and I haven't given you any help, but you've been able to drag out the matter of skipping classes until today. Chapter 723. Nanster, did you kill someone? I didn't. But you messed up. I didn't. Then why did you do a paternity test? I did a paternity test for different mothers. Then it was your dad messing around. Believe it or not, I'll really kill someone. Luo Nan had to endure the wild bombardment of friends and family on the psychic wave network from evening to after dinner. There was also a family meeting about taking a leave of absence from school in the middle. He was mentally and physically exhausted before 9 o'clock. He just wanted to cover his head and sleep when he returned to his room. The after effects of the situation continued to spread. According to Bamboo Pole's estimates, by tomorrow morning, news of the proponent of the cage and configuration theory, the mental side genius Professor Luo Nan conducting a secret paternity test and suspected of having an illegitimate child would fill all the major forums, discussion groups, tabloids, and other platforms of the inner world. It would become one of the hottest topics of conversation in the inner world. The culprit, Octopus, was in a stupefied state. He was quite unlucky. When Luo Nan contacted him, he was working as a volunteer in the branch's biological laboratory. He was being exploited. He was so busy that his brain was a bit desensitized. From what he saw at the time, Luo Nan's request was too simple. Any assistant would be able to handle it. So he really did hand this matter over to his assistant. There was even a sampling service. And so, the beautiful and cute Miss Assistant, who had a screw loose in her head and a slightly wide lip structure, was driving to Luo Nan's house when the news completely exploded. In a sense, this was a very serious leak. It was said that He Yuan had dragged Octopus off the laboratory table and thrown him into the interrogation room. Then Octopus used the room as a refuge. He crouched down holding his head and refused to come out. The problem was that Luo Nan was several dozen kilometers away, staring coldly at him. Luo Nan was considering whether or not he should give Octopus a taste of heaven's punishment. In the end, Luo Nan held himself back. He didn't want this big news to get out. He could only force himself to concentrate and think about matters related to the Xie Luo sect. Even though the paternity test results had yet to come out, Luo Nan could confirm that this tiny sect had a very close relationship with his grandfather and the wilderness laboratory of yesteryear. Wu Jun, the high priestess of the church, was his grandfather's graduate student. They had worked together in the laboratory for many years. Even after the accident in the laboratory, they still kept in touch. It was a small order that was closely related to their family. It had endured for so many years, stumbling and stumbling. Not to mention the story behind it, just its existence alone was enough for Luo Nan to pay considerable attention to it. The characteristics of the form, soul, and energy were the best to touch upon the essence. Luo Nan stopped writing and sighed. Perhaps he was still too anxious. If he continued to toss and turn like this, it would take at least a week. He would consume a large amount of strength every day, and it was very likely that he would do useless work. He didn't forget that the most pressing task right now was to get used to the biochemical reactor he brought back from Spring City as soon as possible. He needed to erase the hidden dangers of the cloud world as soon as possible. Oh, look at what I've drawn. Right now on the flexible e-ink screen, there was a list of simplified steps and keywords to take note of. There was a schematic diagram of the algorithm needed for a global search. There was a basic outline of Wu Jun's store that was being monitored from 2,000 kilometers away. In addition, there were also some lines that outlined a somewhat fuzzy portrait of a person in the center of the drawing interface. This was a woman. She had short hair and a thin face. She wore rather large work clothes. Her body was half squatting and half kneeling in the drawing. She leaned close to the outline of a machine. She even held a repair tool in her hand. She was like a blue-collar worker, but she had a rather weak appearance. The first thing Luo Nan could confirm was that he had never seen this person before. Regardless of appearance or temperament, she was very unfamiliar. But soon he confirmed that this woman who had suddenly appeared in the center of the drawing interface was none other than the Wu Jun he was looking for. How did I draw it? It's like this. Luo Nan quickly came to a realization. This sketch was something he found in an electronic photo frame placed in his bedroom when he was observing Wu Jun's store from afar. Then he unconsciously reproduced it. Luo Nan's work was a bit different when compared to the finalized photo. It looked like there was more meaning to it than in the photo. This didn't seem to be just a result of his black and white art style. Luo Nan was a bit surprised by the results of his own creation. But his current thinking and knowledge were far from what it was like when he first entered the profession. He stared at the sketch drawing and analyzed it in detail for a moment. He was certain in his heart, yes. I specifically talked about this when I was discussing with Mr. Bai and the others about entering dreams, divination, and other psychic techniques. This is the magnetization effect. It was just like how non-magnetic materials could obtain magnetism if they were placed in a strong magnetic field for a long time. A person would also form an effect similar to magnetization if they lived in the environment for a long time. From a rational perspective, the result of magnetization was the hair, fingerprints, utensils, trash, and other traces left behind in the target's life. Correspondingly, he calmly accepted the heat that came from the abyss sun wheel. He went a step further to experience the vague laws behind the heat. It was at this moment that a great sun leapt out of the boundless turbid ocean, radiating scorching light and heat, as well as even more penetrative and even destructive power to every level of the turbid ocean in the human heart. Some emotions and desires were instantly vaporized. Some were blown into pieces and lost all meaning on all levels. However, there were still some that, under the bombardment of stimulating energy, revealed information that was previously hidden even deeper. The turbid currents, which had been chaotic in the first place, became even more chaotic. However, under the powerful blast of the abyss sun wheel, the meaningless and low-level information was almost wiped out. What was left was the marvelous water plants and floating objects. Hiss. Cat Eyes woke up from her nightmare once more. The shadow of the human-faced arachnid was annihilated within the brilliant sun disk. However, the crisscrossing chains became even more twisted and taut. There was even a chain that clutched her neck, dragging her along with the vast and boundless chains and spiderweb into the depths of the turbid current. The spiderweb forcefully churned within the turbid current, entangling countless impurities and trash. Of course, there were some catches that Cat Eyes could not understand. She herself was one of the catches. She had long since been bound to it, unable to escape. And no matter how much Cat Eyes struggled within the turbid flow, no matter how deep she was pulled, the intense light and heat that came from the brilliant sunwheel would always envelop her. It reached far and wide and pervasive. It increased the temperature layer by layer, causing her already extremely fragile willpower to distort, collapse, and boil over together with the impatient emotions at the bottom of her heart. During this process, Cat Eyes felt Luo Nan's gaze. It was not focused on her. Instead, it was focused on all things within the turbid ocean. It was focused on all the distorted and fragmented images and information. Therefore, his gaze was dignified and cold. It blended together with the powerful light of the sun disk, dictating the life and death of all things within the turbid ocean. He was aloof and remote, like a god. Cat Eyes was unfortunate. This was because she understood the source of all unforeseen events more clearly than the ignorant existences around her. Therefore, she was the equivalent of looking directly at a god. She endured an even deeper level of destructive pressure. However, Cat Eyes was fortunate. At the very least, she was within the scope of the rules of this grand system. She was close to a god, possessing a bit of the right to pray or beg. Huff. Huff. Cat Eyes' breathing was still heavy for a long time after she woke up. It was the same as every time after a nightmare. Chapter 725. The Psychic Drawing. After tossing and turning for an entire night, this was what came out. Cat Eyes endured the loathsome sun as she headed west from her home in the city center. She crossed several hundred kilometers to arrive at the black market in the outskirts of the satellite city of Xia City, Mangzhong. All of this was thanks to Luo Nan and his latest work. She had not forgotten that she had fallen into this pit in the first place because of this damned psychic drawing. A certain someone actually had the face to ask her to come out and scout for information. What did he mean by, "It involves the black market"? It's not good to disturb Sister Yuan. It was clearly revenge. Revenge. She was muddle-headed. Why didn't she smash the drawing into that fellow's face back then? Oh, she couldn't hit him even if she did. Ungrateful, despicable demon, shameless to the extreme, still trying to act innocent after getting a bargain. In any case, Luo Nan couldn't hear it. Even if he did, Cat Eyes wouldn't care. So all sorts of negative adjectives and adjectives piled up like they were free. It would be best if she could crush that bastard to death. Cat Eyes kept cursing in her mind. At the same time, she didn't forget to memorize all sorts of details on the psychic drawing, especially the outline of the cruise ship. Luo Nan said that he had blindly drawn it based on his feelings, but this was a psychic drawing. With Luo Nan's current fame, there would probably be plenty of people fighting over it if he were to take it out for auction. The location of the cruise ship on the drawing is too far away. Plus, its silhouette from the side. It feels like it's very high up. The top deck has many wing-like silhouettes. They might be antennas, bridges, and the like. Cat Eyes, whose mind was busy, finally stepped into the vagrant trade center known as the Wild Inn. The style of this cave-like building was closer to the original ecology. There were fewer customers during the day, so the owner took the opportunity to stock up and deliver goods. This place was more like a freight yard than a hotel. The bar on the first floor of the tavern was only open in the corners around the bar counter. The lighting was deliberately dimmed. The atmosphere of private transactions came out, but whether or not it had any practical significance was another matter. At the very least, for the mental cat eyes, she could pretty much see the overall layout and all the minute changes after entering the tavern. Oh, is this too coincidental or too unfortunate? Around the bar counter, there were a few private booths pieced together by high-back sofas. The seats were more or less full, and they were all conversing in low voices. Cat eyes walked in casually, inevitably drawing everyone's attention. Most people only raised their eyes and quickly focused on their own matters. Only the innermost side of the room was a little old man who happened to be facing the outside. He winked at her and bared his teeth. Cat eyes responded with a wink. She casually pointed to the bar counter beside her, indicating that they should each do their own thing. The stooped, lazy, and spiritless little old man was none other than Sia City's branch's veteran B-rank psychic. At the same time, he was also an expert in soul studies, Mr. Bai. They were all acquaintances and friends. The more it was like this, the more they would pay attention to protecting each other's privacy. Under such circumstances, a simple greeting was enough. On the other hand, the person sitting opposite Mr. White deliberately turned his head and looked at them a few times. Cat Eyes only felt that the fellow looked familiar, but she couldn't recall who he was for a moment. She simply ignored him. She then sat in front of the bar counter. Blood energy, refill. This was both a consumption and a secret signal. Using an expensive drink like blood energy that required honor points indicated that I needed high-end services from the inner world. In the wild inn, such high-end services were usually information. As for refill, it indicated that I had an account here. I also made an appointment. The purpose was clear. Don't try to fool me with low-end stuff. The bartender revealed a professional smile. He quickly took out a sealed cup of blood energy from the expensive and sturdy safe beside him and placed it on a tray. Aside from the blood energy, there was also a small flexible screen on the tray. A series of items were listed on the screen. Cat Eyes finished scanning the items on the flexible screen in the time it took her to open the packaging. She then rolled her eyes. You guys are going to go bankrupt here, right? Ha! The time to make an appointment is a bit short. I understand that you didn't make enough preparations, but you don't need to use information from a week ago to trick me. Also, you can count these two small dinghies as cruises. Can your family's cruises enter an underground river? The bartender's professional smile crumbled a bit. He didn't wait for Cat Eyes to respond when a figure came over and knocked on the counter, indicating for the bartender to get lost. Don't embarrass yourself here. Consider today's pay your training fee. Go work hard. The bartender was a bit stunned. Young Master Zone. Go go go. I'm going to chat with my friend. As he spoke, the person who just came over laughed and greeted, Oh my, little cat, long time no see. You just came out of the hospital. Did you get your alimony payment? It was this fellow who had been talking with Mr. Bai just now. He even turned his head to size her up. Cat Eyes lifted her eyelids and swept her gaze over the person's face twice. She finally remembered who this round-faced and slightly plump brother was. She didn't say anything. She picked up the blood energy drink and flipped her hand to pour it over. Holy crap! That person suddenly flipped over. His figure could barely be considered nimble, but he was still splashed on his shoulder and the corner of his head by the drink worth 2 honor points. He cut an extremely sorry figure for a time. Cat Eyes didn't follow up with an attack. She only said, It's yours. It's mine, it's mine. It's mine. That person accepted the towel the waitress handed over. He hastily wiped his face twice and was willing to accept his punishment. Someone who could speak to cat eyes like this was indeed an acquaintance. He could barely be considered a friend. Young Master Zong's name was Zong Yun. He was also a registered member of the Xia City branch. Plus, he had a good father. He was one of the branch's 3B rank fleshly bodies. He was the combat master Mr. Zong Ji, who was famous for his perfect rotation. Although Zong Yun had learned from his family, Zong Yun was a wanderer. He didn't have many accomplishments in the field of combat techniques. He stumbled and barely crossed the C rank barrier. He had an identity in the society, so he put all his enthusiasm into the world of sensual pleasures. He flew all over the world all year round. He spent very little time in Xia City. Oh right, back in the day, this brother also chased after cat eyes. But one time, as an assistant, he personally demonstrated the magic of being pierced through the anus by a flying needle. After that, he kept a respectful distance from cat eyes. Please forgive me for today's matter. Last time, that base from the Order of Justice went crazy with alcohol. He brought a bunch of people and pretty much massacred this place. The experienced ones either died or fled. We, the ones who took over, were helpless. Cat eyes raised an eyebrow. You're here, little boss. Little boss. Participate in the stock market for fun. Let my old man feel at ease. Oh. Then I wish you good fortune. Cat eyes swept her gaze over the simple and crude furnishings of the cave. She gave him some auspicious words without any sincerity. Playing in this area of Xia City is a small business. It doesn't have much of a future. I'm counting on my old friend to take care of me. Zong Yun fawningly delivered 2 cups of blood energy. Of course, it was free. If it weren't for my old man getting angry, I wouldn't have invested this money in Xia City even if you beat me to death. If I had the spare time, I could have run to Ban City, T City, or Luo City and invested in a small shop. As long as I could make money from both sides, I might be able to shake it up in 2 years. But here, when I think of the 3 heavyweights and Professor Luo, I tremble. My heart trembles. Cat eyes picked up the cup and faintly smiled. This was also a vagabond trading house. Disregarding the 3 typical examples that Zong Yun had mentioned. Mr. Bai drank a large mouthful of chicken soup for the soul, but the one who drank the most was still himself. At the same time, he poured mouthful after mouthful of the soup into his mouth. It made his figure seem all the more stooped and even pitiful. Cat eyes did not go along with him. She did not console him. She just drank cup after cup with Mr. Bai. She waited until the little old man's mood had calmed down a bit before she said, Mr. Bai, I want to ask for guidance. What in the world is the psychic technique? Mr. Bai went, oh, and suddenly raised his head. His mind was clearly roused. Luo Nan is trying to psychic again. He's drawing right. What's the situation? Do you have any works of art on hand? Cat eyes raised her cup. She smiled and swayed, but she did not say anything. Mr. Bai reacted. She had just asked 1 question, and he had thrown back 4 questions in a row. This was not proper. He chuckled in amusement and poured himself another cup. This could be considered an apology. Your boss Luo is a first-rate psychic in Xia City. You should go ask him this question. Oh, right. Is he still saying that his psychic technique is just a random drawing, that he's just making up the numbers? Cat eyes was surprised. She immediately sneered, this is taking advantage of him and then flaunting it. This has always been his style. Mr. Bai slapped the table and laughed out loud. This time, he temporarily forgot about his vexed matters. He was in high spirits as he said, that's right. When he said these words back then, I wanted to slap him. Look at his battle achievements and psychic effects. Even old Yu has times where he makes mistakes. How much is his success rate? 100%. Oh. You psychics have been having quite a few gatherings these past few months. It's always been like this. It's just that Boss Luo didn't participate in the past and you didn't care, so you didn't pay attention. Speaking of psychics in Xia City, most of us have been affected by old Yu's magnetization. Our psychic senses and judgments are quite decent. We have quite a bit of talent in psychic techniques. Oh my. Counting from old Yu, me, Gao Tianshi, and Horn Demon, for consecutive B-rank psychics are psychics. Oh, Her Majesty Empress Wu has a divine and heavenly disposition, so she can't be counted. Luo Nan is the first person who hasn't been affected by old Yu. Also, the bamboo pole can only be considered broken when it comes to him. Mr. Bai checked the name list and commented one by one, here, old Yu is proficient in divination techniques. The tall and fierce Gao Tianshi borrows the self-hypnosis techniques of the ancient religious system. He invites the gods to possess his body. Horned Demon relies purely on his natural endowments. He plays too evil, so let's not talk about it for now. As for me, I engage in dreaming techniques on the mental plane. I construct a dreamland. Hey! If this is the case, then there are quite a few missing links that need to be filled in before the scene of foresight. Oh, I also need to pay attention to the problem of the psychic main body. Wu Jun's whereabouts is a problem I urgently want to know. It is related to my personal interests. Therefore, the construction of the dream-inducing world and the rules of its operation revolve around me. The results obtained through psychic communication and divination must be established on the foundation of my deep participation. In this way, the jadeite light isn't simply a place where Wu Jun will appear. It's the intersection point between me and Wu Jun. I can come into contact with the jadeite light at any time, but the intensity of observation shouldn't be enough. Then do I need to personally go there? The psychic technique isn't tampering with the world line. Instead, it's a kind of observation, grasp, and conjecture of the natural development trend. In other words, if things continue to develop according to normal circumstances, I might have a higher chance of boarding the jadeite light and meeting up with Wu Jun there. 15 minutes ago, the concept of the ultra-luxurious giant ship, the jadeite light, didn't exist within Luo Nan's knowledge. However, the current location of this giant ship was the cruise ship dock of Ban City. Ban City was a place Luo Nan had to go to in the next few days. He needed to make advance arrangements for the purge of the cloud world. He also needed to use the resources of the Blood Flame Order over there to practice and master the new abilities brought about by the biochemical reactor. In particular, he needed to adapt to the short yet powerful explosive period of the weak electromagnetic muscle structure. The situation seemed to have become a bit clearer. But how could he take another step forward? He never had any plans to ride a cruise ship. He didn't even have one now. Who could hold a gun to his head and force him onto the ship? Luo Nan went in circles for the following period of time, but he didn't get any results. Right when he was feeling helpless, the Hexier vibrated slightly. Someone was looking for him. Luo Nan raised his eyebrows when he saw the contact. Oh my, this is a broken pot that's broken. He's taking the initiative to deliver his head. The person who sent the communication request was none other than a certain person who had gotten into trouble by mistakenly believing in Big Mouth. Luo Nan let out a breath and directly issued an ultimatum after connecting. Bro Octopus, let's meet in the fighting arena tomorrow. We'll settle our grudges in a single fight. I guarantee I won't kill you. Can I talk about proper business? My proper business has become a world-class tidbit. Why don't you explain it to me? Cough, a professional explanation is definitely no problem for me. According to the YSTR gene locus, you and the other person definitely don't belong to the same paternal line. You need to know that I've even collected a sample from your grandfather. I've even called up the SCA database for your father's genetic records. I can confirm that there isn't even a 1 in 10,000 chance. This is good news, right? Hee hee. Luo Nan could only respond in this manner. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan let out a sigh of relief in his heart with this kind of result. Even though he didn't have any so-called expectations towards a certain person, it wasn't a bad thing to be able to be a bit less disgusting. Also, he could use a more natural attitude to face polio. This was undoubtedly a good thing. Right. This was a good thing. But he still wanted to beat that bastard octopus to death. Octopus laughed dryly a few more times, but he lacked the strength to continue. He simply sent a picture over. The picture was automatically projected onto his retina in the communication state. It should be an automatic photo. The items on the picture were all crooked, but fortunately, the general appearance could be seen. The surface of the thing was wrapped in leather. The pages of paper were folded together in the middle, and they were connected by neatly arranged metal rings. It looked square and heavy, and the whole thing was a bit fluffy. Yes, this was an old notebook. It was an item that had practically been eliminated in the current era. However, the one in the picture clearly fully realized its value. Looking at the stains on the edges, it should be more or less filled with words. Rational thoughts flowed to this point. Only then did the emotional response suddenly surge forth. It was like liquid nitrogen leaking out of control. It instantly froze Luo Nan's expression. He was far too familiar with this form and appearance. In fact, he had one right by his side. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.